Hey guys, it's Grace from Graceful Books, and I am back with another video. So today's video is actually going to be an in-depth book review on A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Brigid, Kemmerer. This is the second book within a Curse Breakers series or trilogy. I believe it's trilogy, it may not be. But this is the second book within it, and this is going to be a super spoilery review for the first book and this book. So if you do not want to be spoiled for either of them, I suggest you go check them out, read them, enjoy them, and then come back here so you can listen to this spoiler review and discuss with me your thoughts on it and tell me what you think is going to happen and what you want to happen and whether you loved it or hated it. So, see you then. If not, welcome to this video and let's get into the review. So, if you keep seeing me looking down, it's because my notes are on the floor. I don't like doing this, so I have them on the floor so I can peek at them on occasion. But I will say that normally with my reviews, I get a little rambly. I like to just spill my feelings out. So this review probably will not have a lot of structure to it. And I'm hoping that that works. If not, maybe I'll experiment in the future with other formats for my reviews, but this is how we're starting off. Also, I'm really sorry about the lighting. I tend to try to use natural lighting, but it's very overcast today, so I'm trying to use some other lights in my room, and it's not the most flattering thing, so I'm hoping that I'm able to fix it a little bit in editing, but we'll see. But anyways, let's get into this review. So if you know nothing about this series, it is essentially a fantasy retelling of Beauty and the Beast. In the first one, we followed three main characters: Harper, Prince Ren, and his commander guard and chief, which is Gray. And in that book, we follow Harper as she essentially sees Gray dragging a random lady unconscious through the streets, and Harper's like, oh no, can't let that happen, and charges in to save the young girl. But as a result, she ends up getting taken by this guy instead and transported to a completely different world where she is stuck in a season with this prince who she wants nothing to do with, because essentially he and his guard Gray kidnapped her and are keeping her there against her will. And the whole entire plot of the story is that Ren and his guard Gray are doomed to repeat a cycle until one of the ladies that Gray brings back from our world to their world falls in love with Ren and breaks the curse. And the curse is that at the end of each cycle, Ren will turn into a monster, terrorize his people, and so on and so forth. And when the cycle resets, basically everyone who died during that cycle, the cycle before, is left dead. And as a result, Ren and Gray are literally the only ones left in the castle, and their kingdom, Emberfall, is completely falling apart. The people are wondering where the heck is the royal family? Why have they not been taken care of at all? Why is there this monster and all this stuff? So a lot of things are going wrong in this, and Harper is kind of like, what the heck am I doing here? I want nothing to do with this. Take me back home. Also, I forgot to mention that she has cerebral palsy. So there's some rep for that in this series. And yeah, also Harper's life at home, in our world, isn't super nice. Her mother is dying from terminal cancer, and her brother is doing some sketchy things to try to pay off their debt to loan sharks, which Harper is sort of involved in, sort of not. But her life at home is not the greatest. But she obviously wants to be there with her family so she can help her brother make sure that he's all right, keep him out of super deep trouble, and also spend time with her mother. But now she's trapped here with this prince who she wants nothing to do with. And yeah, I personally really loved the first book. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It touched me, it made me happy, it made me cry. I got all the fluttery butterfly feelings, and I absolutely loved the hate to love concept in it. I felt like it was reasonable, and the way that it was portrayed was really well done. And I also thoroughly enjoyed Harper as a main character. She is one of my more favorite female protagonists that I've read about in a book, and I absolutely adore her. And then Ren, I grew to love too. And Gray, I grew to love. Like, I loved all of them. And I loved their, like, dynamic with each other. The friendships and relationships in that book were fantastic. So, pan over to this book, where now we know that Gray is the true heir to the throne and also is a mage smith, which up until this point we haven't seen him use any powers or abilities, things along those lines. So in order to not fuck up the legitimacy of the throne for Ren, because he cares so much for Ren, he decides to hide and basically erase himself from this world. And he ends up becoming a stable hand for like a fighting rink and I guess a betting place too. I think it's a betting place as well. But he takes care of the horses in the stables along with this young guy named Tycho, who I absolutely adore. And so we're following Gray's perspective as he's trying to hide away, and Ren's people are trying to find the mage smith that is the heir to the throne because he's fearful of magic and wants this stuff to be taken care of immediately. So he's put up like a 500 silver reward for the capture of the mage smith. And we have that going on. And then we follow another character's perspective, which is Liamara. And she is the oldest daughter of Kemmerer, who is like one of the villains in the first book. And she is a princess, but not really, according to her mother, because her younger sister, Nolavarin, is actually the heir to the throne. Because in their culture, in their kingdom, Still Shallow, that is how it's done. The queen or king chooses who the actual heir is to the throne. And she chose Nolavarin, Liamara's younger sister. So Liamara kind of feels tossed aside and stuff like that. But she is very like peaceful. She wants peace. She wants to help Everfall, and she also wants to help her people. But her mother and her sister are a little bit more ruthless, a little bit more cruel, and that's why Nolavarin is going to be the heir, not Liamara. And we follow Liamara as she kind of has this internal struggle with who her family wants her to be and who she wants to be and who she actually is, and also trying to help out Ren when Ren doesn't really want her help. So we have those like two perspectives, and Liamara and Gray obviously come together at some point against Ren, essentially. And we have this story. So I'm going to start off on a bit of a negative note, just because, actually, no. I'm not going to start off on a negative note. I'm going to talk about all the good things in this book. First of all, I want to say that Brigid Kemmerer is so good at creating, like, good friendships and sometimes relationships. I absolutely adored the addition of Tycho to the story. He is fantastic. I absolutely want to protect him with all of my heart and soul. He is so beyond adorable, but like tough at the same time. And I absolutely love his relationship with Gray, how loyal he is to Gray. He is straight up like, I will be your right-hand man. Just say the word and I'll do whatever you want. I'll lay my life down for you. He's basically what Gray was to Ren at some point, except for he's way more loyal. Or, not way more loyal. Gray's way nicer to him than Ren was to Gray. But I absolutely adored Tycho. And to top it off, his relationship with Isaac, I don't know how you pronounce his name, so I'm sorry. I'm going to probably say a bunch of different ways. Isaac or whatever. I love him too. I love that he's kind of a morally gray character, and you're able to see that through his interactions with the group, but also he does things for the betterment of the people in his group. He challenges Gray all the time on what Gray thinks of himself, and I adore that because him and Gray end up like toughing it out at some point, like button heads, swords, claws, all that stuff. And I think the way that he came into the picture and essentially just attacked Gray, and then after doing that, they're like, yes, you're welcome into the group. I seriously love the dynamic between Gray and Isaac. Isaac and Tycho specifically, I adore their relationship. It's kind of like a father-son relationship, and that was confirmed for me, especially when we find out that Isaac is actually the king of his people. And the way he's been treating Gray and Tycho feels very fatherly after reading that part, because he wants Gray to not make the same mistake that his own son made. So he's encouraging him to take the throne and not deny his right to it, which Gray, throughout the whole entire book, is like, I'm not entirely sure that I want to claim the throne. And I adore that Isaac's kind of like, you should take the throne because it'll destroy you if you don't. And I enjoyed that aspect. I enjoy that Isaac is kind of morally gray. He has these bouts of moments where he's kind of like dark and does messed up things, but he does it because he cares about the people in the story and because he cares about his own family and his own kingdom and his own people. It's just interesting seeing how each of the ruling people in this story kind of do things for the good of their people or the betterment of their kingdoms, and it comes out portrayed a different way because of essentially the problems that they're facing themselves. And I really enjoyed that aspect. Also, I got really soft and my eyes watered when Isaac and Tycho had this little moment. So my favorite scene between them is when Liamara is about to visit the dungeon to visit Isaac, and she runs into Tycho, and she's like, I'm going down to the dungeons to visit Isaac. Want to come along? And Tycho's like, hold on, give me a second. And he runs to his room and then comes back, and she's like, okay, whatever. And they go down to the dungeons, and then Tycho just like takes a little like wrap package that has sweets in it and little meat pies, and he's like, I brought this for you. And Isaac, like with his big meaty claws, just comes over and picks it up so gently and then just sets it down next to, like, my eyes watered. I thought it was so cute and my heart was just, whoo, they're so precious. I seriously loved and adored Tycho, Gray, and Isaac's relationships, like, and friendships. They were just fantastic, and I really adored them by the end of the book. I will say that I liked Jake and Gray's dynamic, but I've read better versions of enemies kind of becoming friends, such as in the Ink and Bone series. So the way this one was done wasn't fantastic. I still enjoyed it, don't get me wrong. I still enjoy Jake and Gray's friendship and relationship and how loyalty is kind of coming from Jake naturally. I really love that. But at the same time, I've read it being done better, so this one didn't floor me entirely, but I still enjoyed it. And then I'm kind of upset that Noah feels like he kind of just pops up when any injury or medical emergency happens. I feel like he's just there to be smart, and that's all he adds to the group. He doesn't really talk much, so when he talks, it's literally just to tell you, hey, don't do this stuff, you're gonna hurt someone, or hey, this might be going on, or like spout out a random medical fact, which makes sense because he's a doctor in our world. But I feel like I would have loved it a lot more if he had more involvement, because he's probably the most level-headed person in the group, and yet I feel like he never stood up to like stop crap from going down, and I would have loved it way more if he did, because then it would have felt like he was the no-nonsense smart one who's kind of keeping everyone in line, because everyone in this group kind of butts heads throughout the whole entire book. And I would have loved it if Noah had more of a statement to say in those situations, but he really didn't. And that's kind of upsetting to me because I feel like he could have had a way bigger part to play in this book. But I understand that Brigid Kemmerer was putting a lot of new characters in this book, and I think she wanted to flesh them out a bit more since we already met Noah and Jake in the first book. But even in the first book, we don't get to know too much about them, so it's a little upsetting that they weren't fleshed out even more in this book, but that's just my personal opinion. Liamara is I'll get into that later, but so the next thing is that I really loved Gray's conflict. I think I already mentioned that. I love that he has this loyalty towards Ren, and he spent all these seasons being tormented alongside Ren by Lilith, and also seeing Ren be tortured. And he has this extreme love for him. And it essentially is a brotherly love. You can't say that it's not. And I just love that it's becoming more of a real thing because he actually is his brother now. But obviously there's a lot of conflict going what was that? There's a lot of conflict going on that's kind of keeping them apart. Ren, first of all, is fearful of magic. Ren had Tycho and Gray's backs ripped open because they wouldn't tell him that he is the Mage Smith and the heir to the throne. And so Ren's doing a lot of messed up things in this book. And that's upsetting considering that we spent the whole entire first book kind of falling in love with him. But I enjoyed it a little bit in this book. Not saying that I condone what he did, but I enjoy the fact that in the first book, there's more of a physical monster quality to him. In this book, it's more of a symbolic thing where he's doing a lot of choices and making a lot of decisions that are hurting the people he cares about, as well as hurting his kingdom. And odds are that's not what Ren wants to actually do, but he's not thinking straight. He's terrified. And when you're terrified, you don't make the best decisions. And I enjoy that in a symbolic sense, he's kind of becoming a monster that he doesn't want to be. But also at the same time, we know that he's doing these things because he's terrified out of his fucking mind. And it just makes your heart hurt for him a little bit. I feel like I may be like the only one who felt that way because I read a lot of reviews where everyone was pissed off with what Kemmerer did with Ren. But I personally didn't have an issue with it. I do love Ren. And I love character development that kind of shocks me. And this is character development that shocks me. But I think in the end, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I also want to say that I absolutely loved the way this book ended. I enjoyed the fact that Ren is kind of being visited by Lilith again. And because earlier in the book, Noah mentions PTSD possibly being what's causing Ren to act the way he is and lash out the way he is, which makes sense because he's been tortured nonstop, probably for centuries, by this one lady who has a magical ability. So it makes sense for him to fear magic like so viscerally that he lashes out and just makes decisions and choices that hurt people he cares about because he's just that scared. And obviously, I'm not an expert on PTSD. I don't know too much about it. But from my understanding of it, I feel like that kind of helps explain it. Obviously, people with PTSD are not monsters. They're not. They face a trauma, and trauma changes the way your brain functions. It changes the way you do things, it changes simple things, and it changes drastic things for a person. So I'm not saying that it makes someone a monster. I hope that's not how this is coming across as. But I enjoy that Noah tossed that out in one of the group's conversations. But I feel like it wasn't fleshed out enough for them to really understand possibly why that's causing Ren to act the way that he's acting. Because trauma changes your brain. It literally does. And it can mess with you. So I feel like that being an explanation for possibly why Ren is acting the way he is interesting. And I enjoyed that prospect of the book. But also, it made the ending of the book kind of questionable. So you don't really know if Lilith is actually there or not. Because people with PTSD obviously have flashbacks to their trauma, and they can seem very, very real, obviously, because they react to it in the setting that they're in currently. So I feel like it's a possibility that Lilith actually isn't even there, and that intrigues me even more, because if she's not there, then Ren's making all these choices and decisions that are affecting his people, affecting his relationships, for fear of losing Harper, first of all, and also for fear of himself and his kingdom. And I loved that ambiguity, but also if Lilith actually is there, that's messed up, and my heart's gonna completely break for Ren. I mean, it's already breaking for Ren, honestly. Let's be real. My heart is already breaking for Ren and his situation because it's messed up and I feel awful. But I'm really intrigued to see how that goes on in the next book, and I'm hoping in the next book we kind of learn more about what's been going on since the weeks that Gray has not been around. And I want to know what's going through Harper's mind as well, personally, just because I love her and Ren. as characters, and I think Ren's character is going to get a lot more complex as the series goes on, and I'm going to thoroughly enjoy that. But also, like I said, my heart's going to break for him because it already is breaking for him, and I feel awful. But I think Kemmerer is making this series very interesting right now. So, another thing is, there is romance in this book. It's between Liamara and Gray, and I will say that I do have some issues with them as an item, but I want to point out that Kemmerer is very, very good at writing intimate scenes. I didn't necessarily ship Liamara and Gray, but when they were having those intimate talks around the fire, or when they were just alone in general, my heart kind of fluttered, and I felt like breathless a little bit. I got super excited and just flustered as well. She's very good at writing those intimate scenes and writing those intimate conversations between two people that are starting to have feelings for each other. But I will say there was only one scene that I was kind of like, okay, that's kind of cringy, like, stop. And that was the buck scene where Liamara shot a buck point blank. Not point blank, it wasn't point blank, but she shot a buck, killed it on the spot. Perfect shot. And her and Gray, like, lug that thing, and he's just telling her that she can do this, which is, like, really sweet. It's really, really sweet. But in my mind, I was kind of like, okay, this is kind of cheesy. Can we, like, stop? I don't know. I wasn't the biggest fan of that scene, but every other scene I really liked. Oh, also, I want to say that I like the fact that Kemmerer actually gives her, like, side characters. Majority of the side characters an actual, like, point to the story. They're not just there to, like, elevate the main character. I feel like they have their own trials and tribulations and motives and what they're going through. Like, obviously, Isaac has this motivation to find out what happened to his son, and he can't really do that if he's forced back into the ice forests to take care of his people. So he decides to be indentured to Grape, essentially, for a year so he can figure out what exactly happened to his son. So that's his motivation, is finding out what happened to his son and then returning to his people, and if he's still the ruler, like, taking care of stuff that's been going on since he was gone. And then also, Tycho's, like, main thing is that he doesn't want to be indebted to Warwick anymore, which thankfully I think that's no longer a thing. So now I think Tycho's main goal is just to enjoy life, and I think he is with a certain Nola Varon. Also, Nola Varon is my next topic of conversation. I loved her. She's another character that's kind of like morally gray. You're not entirely sure about her for most of the book. And then, like, near the end, Gray, being who he is able to, like, realize that she's actually just a young girl who's being heavily influenced by her mother, who is a dick. And she literally just has no way of saying no to her mother. She just doesn't have, like, the ability. She doesn't have the willpower to do it. So she does whatever her mother essentially wants from her, and her mother's not a kind person. So Nola Varon throughout the book is kind of portrayed as this cruel person, when in reality she's not. She's just a confused young girl who's doing what she's told because she's the heir and she doesn't want to mess it up or disappoint her mother. And also, Nola has, like, a very close relationship with Leah, and I think it's really, really adorable. I think the sisterly relationship in this book is well portrayed. There's obviously still tension between them, which I feel like is realistic. I feel like there's tension between most siblings, and there's sometimes the favored sibling or the not so favored sibling. I feel like that's a realistic thing that happens in real life. So I was able to understand that concept and get fully absorbed into it. And I really, really enjoyed the fact that they still heavily cared about each other through it all, because that's what siblings are about. Like, they have their tiffs, they have their disagreements, they have their problems. Obviously, Nola and Leah's problems are a bit different from ours. Like, my parents aren't going to ask me to kill my sister or, like, to bring my sister out to be slaughtered. Like, my parents aren't going to do that, but Nola's mother does. So their problems are a little bit different, but they still heavily care about each other, and I think that was such a genuine relationship. And I did cry at one point because of Nola Varon. Like, she got me all emotional. She's a precious little bun, and I want to protect her, and I ship her and Tycho now. Like, at the end, they were like sword fighting, getting all up in it, and it was adorable. And I was like, Nola Varen is finally acting like a child because of Tycho, and it's good. It's good stuff. And so I heavily ship it. I really do. So I want to read more about Nola in the next book. Like, I enjoy her as a character. I think she's precious. I also want to say before I get into the negatives of this book that I really enjoyed reading this. I think Kemmerer has a really nice writing style. It's really easy to read, and it's nice and chill, and I just enjoyed it. I found myself getting super excited for a bunch of scenes. I was just very into it, even though I do have critiques of it. I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I forgot to say that earlier on, but I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. It wasn't as good as the first book for me, but it was still good. So now, sadly, we got to get into the negatives, which for me is Liamara. That sounds so bad. But just hear me out. She's a Mary Sue. Like, she literally has nothing wrong with her. She's perfect in every way. Perfect to the point that she does things that should be impossible for, like, a regular human, I feel like. So, hear me out. There's this scene where she's trapped in Iron Rose Castle. She's being held prisoner there, but she's in, like, a lavish, beautiful room, and she's chilling. She peeks out the window, and this is when Gray and Tycho get captured by the royal guard, and they're brought to the front doorstep to be brought in front of Wren and Harper to kind of talk and all this stuff. And she peeks out the window right when Gray's talking to Wren, and she's like, oh my gosh, he doesn't just know who the Aaron Mage Smith is. He is the Aaron Mage Smith. Explain to me how that makes sense at all. How she was able to figure that out so quickly. I mean, Harper was there. And Harper knows Wren and Gray so well, and I'm pretty sure at this point she understands the politics of this world pretty decently, considering that she's helped with the politics in this world. So, you'd think that Harper, of all people, would actually catch on to the fact that Gray's the heir in the Mage Smith. But no, a completely random girl who is just now, like, seeing Gray for the first time, not even, like, seeing him up close and personal, seeing him from a distance, from, like, a second or third story window, from a distance, she's like, oh my goodness, he's the secret Aaron Mage Smith. Explain to me how that makes any sense, how she came to that conclusion so quickly. I know that Kemmerer tried to explain, like, her thought process, and then she explained it again. So there was 2 times where it was, like, explained, but I still could not process how she was able to figure that out so quickly when there were multiple people there who have been around Wren and Gray for a decent amount of time who weren't able to pick up on the fact that Gray was honoring his guard code, which is to protect the family, and, like, not reveal things that could hurt your family, aka Wren, his brother, his half-brother. How? And then there's another scene where she's able to figure out that DC is not a part of her world at all. They're just talking about, like, teleportation, and they reveal that DC, like, does not exist. The forces of DC do not exist, essentially. And she's just like, she comes up with it. She's like, it's not even from this world, is it? It's part of another world. And I'm sitting there thinking, are you kidding me? Hear me out. I'm a pretty decently imaginative person, so for her to come up with this on the spot out of nowhere is kind of just, excuse me? Really? I feel like if I had this conversation with Gray and Jake and Noah and all of them, I would not have come to that conclusion at all. And yet she came up with it so quickly. It just felt unreasonable and not realistic at all. She's just perfect. She's perfect in every way. She can kill a buck on sight with 1 shot from far away. Like, okay. And she's so charming and lovable to literally everyone who meets her. There's nothing wrong with her. People would probably argue that she has an inferiority complex, which makes no sense at all, because in order for her inferiority complex to make sense for me, I have to have some sort of attachment to her relationship with her mother, which there is none. That's not established at all throughout the entire book. We just have this kind of idea that her mother thinks of her as lesser. But when we have scenes with Karis Lorraine and Liamara and Nola Varon, I don't feel like any particular animosity towards Liamara. I know that there were scenes where the intent was to show you that the relationship is fractured and messed up, but it didn't work for me because it felt so forced and fake. Because if Karis Lorraine can have some sort of emotion for her youngest daughter, she can have some sort of like soft emotion for her oldest daughter, and that's never shown. So as a result, I don't feel like Liamara necessarily craves the touch or the love of a mother because she's never really had it. So how does she know what it feels like? How does she know what she wants exactly from it? I don't know if any of this is making any sense. But as a result of it, Karis Lorraine's opinion of Liamara doesn't matter to me at all. So I don't understand why it matters to her at all, because she doesn't even seem to look at her as though she's her mother. So a lot of the times when it came to that, I didn't understand her inferiority complex at all. And I was getting frustrated like Ray was with her for not seeing that she's essentially perfect, because she essentially is perfect. Maybe she's naive, but her naivety really only gets her into trouble maybe once, which is at the start of the book when Sora gets killed and Parrish gets in trouble for following her orders and not the Queen's orders. That's about it. Those are the only moments, in my opinion, where I feel like her naivety got her in trouble. So I think it's beyond ridiculous that she's a Mary Sue. She literally has no faults, nothing at all, except for her inferiority complex, which to me makes no sense. And I understand that in real life, that's probably how it is with most people. A lot of people look down upon themselves, when in reality, you as their friend see them and you're like, I don't understand why you're looking down upon yourself. You're great. You're amazing. And I feel like that's how I felt towards Liamara. I felt like I was the friend looking on at her being like, you're literally perfect. Shut the fuck up. So I got aggravated with her as a character. I just got annoyed with her. And don't get me wrong, I enjoyed her chapters. I didn't fully hate them or anything, but there were just moments where I felt like my eyes rolling because I was questioning how she functions as a character, thinking that she's the worst thing ever when literally everyone adores her. Even the people from her country, which is built upon being cruel and not vile, just being, okay, I'm just gonna say cruel, being cruel. They even love her for her soft and quiet and sweet demeanor. And so literally the only people who have an issue with her throughout the entire book is Ren and her mother doesn't even feel like her mother, so I don't really even care about that. Ren, maybe I do care about, but also I got really frustrated with her throughout the book, so I don't really care at the same time. So, I don't know. She was just very aggravating to me. I felt like a lot of the things going on with her, I felt no emotion towards. And another thing, I mentioned how I cried during a scene with Nola Varon and Liamara. There were multiple scenes where Liamara would start crying, and I would be like, why are you crying? Because, hear me out, I wouldn't realize that Liamara was feeling sad, intense emotions, or feeling upset until it was mentioned that she had tears coming down her face. And up until that point, there was no mention of her being sad, there was no mention of her being upset. Literally nothing. And then all of a sudden she's crying, and I'm sitting there it'd be cool if I was in on this so I could cry too, but I wasn't. So I wasn't able to feel anything, and that was aggravating because, okay, if I'm reading about this character, I want to sympathize with this character, and I could not sympathize with her for the life of me. And it was aggravating because I wanted to. The only time I sympathized with her was in regards to her sister, and that was about it. Which is aggravating because obviously I wanted to sympathize with her more. And the other problem I had with this book is that I feel like Karis Loren wasn't a shockingly evil character. They had so many scenes, especially near the end when they're all finally in Still Shallow, where she does like all these crazy things. Not crazy things. Wrong word choice. Sorry. She does these things that are super awful and super awful because she's essentially hurting people that are innocent, ripping them open with Isaac, even though they're innocent, and trying to have her own daughter killed in front of all of her guards. And Leomara is innocent. So it's basically this whole entire time, I was never shocked or taken aback by her cruelty because she's never been anything nice. She's never been nice. So her cruelty isn't shocking. There's nothing about it that's shocking. Like, so those scenes, I think they were meant to freak me out or make me go, but they didn't because we never get to see a soft side to Karis Loren. So there's no reason for me to think that, hey, maybe she's got a heart. Maybe she's nice. Maybe she's not fucking awful, you know? But we never have a moment with her where we're like, maybe she's different. Maybe she's nice. She always comes into things with like a force. She always comes into things cocky or rude or over the top or just nasty. So we never have this soft side to her that makes us think maybe she's different. Maybe she could be softer. Maybe with her own people she's nicer and stuff like that. No, we never have that moment. I never was shocked by any of the scenes that happened with her. And I also wasn't shocked when Leomara killed her to become the queen. I had a feeling at some point when it was mentioned, like the first time it was mentioned by Grey's new guards, that you could become a ruler of Still Shallow by killing the current ruler. And I was like, at some point, Nola or Leah is going to kill Karis Loren. I even had a thought at one point that Grey was going to do it, but that didn't end up happening. Leomara is the one who did it. So now she's the queen of Still Shallow, which is good for her. Solves a lot of the problems that were happening within this book. But I wasn't shocked by a lot of the things that were supposed to shock me. I was purely invested in this because of the characters and the general story. I personally really, really love and adore Grey, and I'm glad we got to read from her perspective. Oh, that's another thing. Him and Harper thing, I did not ever think they could be a thing. I never shipped them at all either in the first book. I solely shipped Ren and Harper. So when it was revealed in this that Grey kind of had feelings for Harper, I was shocked. Maybe because we never got Grey's perspective until the very end in the first book. So as a result, we didn't really get to see a lot of the scenes between him and Harper from his perspective. So we didn't really see if he was taking it a different way. But from Harper's perspective, I don't think she ever took it in a romantic, kind of intimate way. I think she took it in a friendship way, which as a result skewed the way I viewed this when I walked into it. Because I was not expecting Grey to have feelings for Harper. That kind of came up out of the blue and was very sudden. And I was kind of like, really? I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I feel like other people probably shipped them throughout the first book, and I'm just like the minority on that. But yeah, those are my personal thoughts on this. But yeah, so those are my overall thoughts on this book. I personally really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I just had issues with Leomara, and I want her to have more of a development. I want her to have some sort of flaw that makes her more relatable other than her inferiority complex, because to me it genuinely makes no sense, and I felt like the friend that was talking to a friend who's spitting on themselves essentially and saying that they're awful when you as their friend know they're not. And yeah, I just got frustrated with her as a character, so she was kind of super aggravating to me. But those are my overall thoughts on this book, and I want to know your guys' thoughts. So if you agree with the point I made, if you disagree with the point I made, comment it down below. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this book, or on the first book too. Just talk to me about it. I'm excited to hear your guys' thoughts. So yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a good day, and bye.